Dare to enter Crow's Quill's books, where tales of forgotten realms and fearless souls come alive. Today's journey, Plato Wyngard and the Valley of the Immortals, Chapter 35 to 36, by Mark and James Lindsay. Will you uncover the truth hidden in the shadows? Chapter 35. The next room was of similar dimensions to the last, including a large pit, except that this pit held no water or crocodiles. The bottom of the pit was covered in lush ferns, and located in the center were 5 heavy stone posts, roughly 1.5 feet thick and 10 meters in height. Their surfaces were smooth, except for decorative images carved into them. The posts were lined up uniformly in a tight circle precisely 1.5 meters apart. Despite the quiet and almost serene setting, Luther started to feel anxious. So, what's this challenge involve? I'm thinking some colored ribbon and I have to dance naked around those maypoles, Luther quipped. Not quite. Atop one of those poles is another egg. Simply retrieve the egg just like your friend did, Quion instructed. Difficult, I'll grant you, but nothing like yours, Luther said to Plato. Be careful, buddy. I'm betting there's more to it than meets the eye, Plato warned. He's right, Quion agreed, and she nodded to one of her lieutenants who produced a bull's horn hanging from a leather sling around her neck. Taking a deep breath, she blew into the pointed end. A deep, harsh sound trumpeted out, filling the confines of the room. When she stopped, there was a moment's silence, then a piercing shriek took its place. This was soon joined by another, then another. Plato and the others stared hard into the pit. Nothing could be seen. Over there, Nat pointed. On the far side, a rustle of leaves. Then, at another point in the pit, more rustling. What the hell is that? Luther muttered as something sped through the vegetation. Shit, it's fast, Huyn replied. Then, as if to answer Luther's question, it leapt from the greenery and landed with unerring accuracy on the base of one of the poles, gripping on with inhuman strength. It turned and red eyes stared at Plato's group with what could only be hate. Baboons, they're baboons, Bion whispered. Only like the crocodiles, they too were white and abnormally large. The one on the pole started to shimmy up higher. Its powerful muscles rippled as it moved with ease. Look at those teeth and claws, Not whispered. Yes, I can see that. Thank you so much for drawing my attention to them, Luther said condescendingly. Sorry, big fella, Not shrugged. Absolutely not. This is completely out of the question, Plato growled. Surely my previous efforts have earned us a respite. I mean, is this completely unnecessary? I would like nothing more, but our scriptures are very specific in this endeavor. Only those who complete the tests are worthy of her divinity, Quion said. Plato sagged at the futility on this discussion. Luther put a hand on his shoulder. Don't sweat it, brother. I can't very well have you steal all the accolades, Luther said in his usual confident tone. Luther stood before Quion, his head up, staring into her eyes like a proud warrior. I take it the same rules apply, same as before, Luther asked. That's correct. A single blade, nothing else, Quion explained. I'll stick with my K-bar. Plus, I'll leave my shirt on if that's okay with you, partner, Luther said to Plato. With all of these women here, I wouldn't want them feeling uncomfortable at the sight of my astonishing masculinity. Luther gave them all a wink. They prepared to lower Luther into the pit. He hid his fear and worry well, his face a mask. Like Plato, he had seen war and brutality before facing death was nothing new. As he was lowered down, he watched closely the ground beneath him, and then at the very last second, he dropped into the vegetation almost soundlessly, like a panther. With his K-bar in hand, he adopted a low profile, something not easy due to his large size, and moved quietly through the ferns. Something moved to his left. Luther turned sharply, but it was already gone. Sweat had started to bead on his forehead. Keeping his blade at the ready, he decided that he would focus solely on retrieving the egg. In and out before those dirty apes were even aware, Luther thought to himself. Something moved to his right, and as he turned, a white flash of fur attacked from behind. Launching itself, it struck feet first and swiped with a clawed hand, raking Luther's back and drawing blood. "Argh!" Luther roared in pain. He swung his elbow to the rear, but the beast was already gone. He reached behind and withdrew his hand with a hiss, a worrying amount of blood on his fingertips. "Dirty bastards," he muttered. "They're so quick," Plato yelled down. Luther looked up quickly and nodded. "That they are," he whispered. Several more times he was ambushed in the same manner, and in each encounter, they had managed to cut him open without so much as a return hit on Luther's part. The small amount of blood loss, as well as the heat in the pit, was starting to take a toll on his nerves, which had him jumping at every noise. Luther eventually made it to the central posts intact. Now, standing within the circle, he had to make the right decision, as the task never specified which pole held the egg. Testing the smooth surface of one of the poles, he realized that the task of climbing might prove to be the hardest part of the challenge. As he stood there deep in thought, 3 figures approached, their movements deathly quiet. "Luther, behind you!" Plato yelled. Luther, who had been lost in thought, pivoted immediately, his reflexes finely tuned. He slashed with his K-bar and managed to strike the lead baboon across the midsection, emptying its steaming organs onto the ground. It tried pitifully to crawl away before convulsing once, then lying dead. The other 2 screamed in rage and split, disappearing into the ferns. Not wanting to face the beasts any longer than he had to, Luther devised an idea to make scaling the poles slightly easier. Removing his belt, he wrapped it around the post and held the 2 ends tight. Sliding the belt up the pole, he leant back and dug his heels into the heavily carved images. Using this method, he was able to scale the pillar slowly. "Your friend is very creative and determined," Quian commented with admiration. "You're correct on both counts," Plato replied, not taking his eyes from his friend. In 10 minutes, Luther had managed to make it halfway up the post. Then one of the baboons shot out from the vegetation and raced up the parallel post to Luther's, its speed and agility astounding. Everyone started to scream out warnings as they watched helplessly from the edge. Luther held firm and glanced about, trying to see where the attack was likely to come from. In a blur of motion, the baboon sped up beside Luther and leaped with ease onto Luther's back. Screaming in a frenzy, it sank its claws into his shoulders, then bit down into the muscles on the back of his neck. Flinching from the sudden and intense pain, Luther could do nothing but try and hold on under the simian's unrelenting attack. Blood was starting to run freely down his back, soaking his shirt from the open wounds. Unable to take any more of the punishment, Luther attempted to elbow the beast, but this only resulted in losing his grip on the belt and toppling backward to the ground. Luther landed on his back. The thick vegetation absorbed the brunt of the impact. Luther felt the air expelled from his lungs as he stared up the length of the stone post, wondering what the hell had happened. As he struggled to his feet, the other baboon rushed him from the side. Still recovering from the previous attack, Luther was caught off guard by the second baboon as it lunged towards his throat. Luther dropped and rolled, instinctively reaching for the K-bar tucked in his pants. Luther swiped it around in a long, deadly arc. Only this time the baboon was ready as it leapt away from Luther's blade and back into the vegetation. With his adversaries temporarily absent, Luther wasted no time in his attempt on the stone pillar, anger and a nothing-to-lose attitude overriding any other survival instinct. Luther was halfway up in minimal time, as well as formulating a new tactical idea in dealing with another assault. 5 minutes passed, and Luther was nearly at the top when one of the baboons decided to attempt another attack. With his friends alerting him to its presence, Luther waited and watched. The beast came towards Luther with phenomenal speed. The ex-Marine knew he only had one shot at the albino, so timing it just right, Luther leapt from his post and towards the post the beast was inhabiting. As he collided against it, he did two things. The first was to wrap both arms around its curved contours in a bear hug, and then, with his superior position on the post, he kicked down as hard as he could. The heavy construction of Luther's boot crushed the baboon's skull in one massive blow. The baboon didn't even have time to register the death blow as it toppled lifelessly to the ground. With his attack successful and another foe dealt with, Luther considered his options. He had only lost a small amount of progress, and the third and final baboon was nowhere to be seen. He still had his belt, but there was no way that it was going to be of use in his current position, so he opted to try and shimmy the rest of the distance up. This tactic proved to work, only it seemed to take twice as long. Another 20 minutes passed before Luther finally reached the top, his hands carefully gripping the top of the post as he hoisted himself up. As his face came up, he was bitterly disappointed to find the egg absent from this pillar, and to make matters worse, after a quick look around, he saw that the location of the black egg was 2 posts over. With this in mind, Luther had to make a decision, slide to the ground, and start again. The possibility of further attacks. A strong certainty. He could also balance on his current post and leap across. The distance between posts was achievable, but death or serious injury a clear possibility if he misjudged in any way. He also had to take into account the fatigue he was currently feeling. Luther had always been one to take logical risks, so after a quick deliberation, he decided on jumping. Balancing on one foot on the top of the post, his belt in hand, Luther focused on the top of the next aligned post. He gritted his teeth and leapt, his momentum carrying across. Effortlessly, he landed on one foot. He wobbled, then steadied. Cheering rang out through the room, both from Plato and his team, and the warrior women present. Luther tuned this out as he concentrated on the next target. At that moment, the third and last baboon appeared from the brush below and scampered up the post next to Luther's, the one containing the black egg. It nimbly made its way to the top, and it too stood atop the post, careful not to disturb the egg. It shrieked at Luther, who tried to remain focused on not falling. Realizing that he had no choice in the matter, Luther unraveled his belt and swung it like a whip, trying to strike the baboon with the heavy steel buckle. After several unsuccessful attempts, the baboon leapt directly at Luther, its arms and claws reaching out to tear at his eyes. With his balance relying on a 1-foot stance, no other weapon other than his lucky belt on hand, and the likelihood that the baboon's momentum was going to send them both to their deaths, he did the only thing he could. Duck. Closing his eyes and kneeling down as fast and compact as he could, he prayed it would be enough. He felt a tug on his shirt and started to tilt forward. Then, nothing. Slowly opening his eyes, he realized that he had managed to avoid meaningful contact and remained standing on the middle pole. Looking down, he saw the crumpled figure of the last baboon. Taking a deep breath, Luther smiled broadly and prepared for the final step in the challenge. Without deadly distractions, Luther was able to make the final leap easily and retrieve the black egg. 5 minutes later, Plato, Nhat, and Huin were pulling him out of the pit. Without wasting any time, Luther tossed the egg to a surprised Quian, who nearly dropped the trophy. Bian was the first to congratulate him, giving Luther a hug worthy of a bear. "Well done, buddy. You had me worried for a moment," Plato said. "Not me, cool as a cucumber," Luther replied. "Not to mention I was able to dispatch all of my adversaries," Luther taunted playfully. Plato grinned back. "I'd hardly put baboons in the same league as monster crocodiles," Plato replied. "Well, you two can the banter? I'm just glad that you're both alive and well," Bian said, releasing Luther, immediately tending to his injuries. Quian stepped forward to congratulate Luther on his success. "I am pleased with the way in which you conducted yourself," Quian praised and offered her hand, which Luther ignored. "Not enough to cancel the final challenge, though," Luther said. "As I said earlier, that decision is not up for contention," Quian said. Bian stopped her bandaging. Her current elation disappeared with the realization that her turn to expose herself to an unknown danger was nigh. "When do I start?" Bian asked, her voice slightly higher than usual. "As soon as you tend to your friend's injuries, you have an hour," Quian instructed. Chapter 36. The hour went by quickly, too quickly. After she tended Luther's wound, she simply sat on the ground. "Can I have some tea?" Bian asked. 10 minutes remained before she was to commence her test. "Of course," Quian replied, signaling for the request to be facilitated. Plato sat down next to Bian and leant in close. "Don't worry, I've already talked to the others and I have a plan," Plato whispered. "Really?" Bian replied, then felt silent. A guard moved forward, bearing a tray of refreshments. Bian accepted gratefully, taking a long sip of her tea. Plato declined. "As they move us to the next room, we will disarm the guards, take hostages, and get you out of here," Plato said. Bian's shoulders slumped. "That's the worst plan ever," Bian said glumly. "I'll admit it does lack some of my more ingenious ideas, but it does have its merits. Transitions between the room make the guards lax, not to mention it thins them out," Luther said. "No. Despite your training, you can't guarantee people won't die," Bian said. "At this point, that's not my concern. If you haven't been paying attention, they nearly killed Luther and me," Plato said. "I have been paying attention. We broke in here. They had ample opportunity to kill us when we entered, but didn't. You can't tell me that was luck," Bian argued. "Of course not. They were hurting us here," Plato said, indicating his surroundings. "Not to mention these insane tests that We volunteered," Bian interrupted. "We didn't have a choice in the matter," Plato said, incredulous. "This whole thing is about choices. These women choose to dedicate their lives to a higher calling, protecting an ideal against all manner of oppression. But the weirdest thing about tonight is not that they're making us do these tests," Bian said. "And what's that?" Plato said tiredly. "That they're rooting for us. I'm sure they want us to win," Bian said, her face flushed with renewed hope by her own words. "She's right, brother." "Can't you feel it?" Luther chimed in. "That's all good, but how do you feel about her being thrown to some albino monstrosity?" Plato asked. "Who knows? Maybe she has to catch white butterflies," Luther said, chuckling. "With our luck, they're the kind that can melt a person's face off," Plato said, taking a deep breath. "What I'm saying is that I'll play along for the moment. But the moment I feel that the challenge is beyond her capabilities, I'm going to take matters into my own hands, Plato said. Fair enough, Bion replied. Quian approached. It is time, she said. They were ushered into the third room. This one was the same size as the previous two, but instead of a huge pit in the center, there was a large rock, roughly 1 meter high and 2 meters wide and circular in shape. 5 fist-sized holes had been drilled into the sides of the rock, and above each hole was an inscription. On the top of the rock was another hole. Written upon it was a question. No one said anything. Quian stepped to the center and addressed the group. This is the final test. If you pass, the fourth statue, representing our divine saint, will be yours, Quian stated. She then motioned to one of her lieutenants, who stepped forward with a small timber box. What the hell is that? Plato growled, clearly not happy. The final obstacle, Quian said. The woman holding the timber box opened it and presented the contents to the group. Before they saw it, they could hear clicking and scratching. Inside the box were a dozen large white scorpion-looking insects, their claws and tails scraping noisily within. These insects have no known name. They are extremely rare and extremely deadly. One sting from its tail will result in excruciating death within 40 to 60 seconds, Quian said. And how does this affect our girl here? Huyn asked. Quian nodded, and the woman holding the box emptied the contents into the hole on the top of the rock. There are tunnels throughout the rock, connecting to only 4 of the holes on the sides, which leads us to the test. All the young lady has to do is answer the question by placing her hand in the correct hole and retrieving the final egg. Any help will be treated the same way as the previous tests, by death, Quian said. Bion looked toward Plato, whose eyes were now wide with worry. She then spun towards Quian. He has a gun! Bion screamed, pointing at Plato. Warrior women swarmed over Plato, their numbers too great to resist. Before Luther or any of the others could act, they were all staring down the barrels of automatic weapons. Plato was struggling uselessly, his arms and legs pinned. Bion turned to Quian. He didn't have a gun, but he was planning on protecting me. Don't hurt him, Bion pleaded. I understand. He has a brave heart. You all do, Quian said. I'm sorry, Bion whispered to Luther and the others. It's okay. I might have even done something similar under the circumstances, Luther replied. Bion walked tentatively towards the rock and read aloud the question posed. In her last incarnation on earth, to whom were sacrifices made in her name? Bion read. She then began circling the rock, reading aloud the possible answers. Daughter of the Jade Emperor, Princess Liu Han, the Golden Princess, Jiang Tian, and finally, then Qian Tran. Bion stopped to mull over her options. Everyone watched expectantly. I know the first 3 names were titles bestowed upon her. The last 2 mean Descending Fairy and the God of War. I know the first 2 are not the answers. Daughter of the Jade Emperor was her initial title and Princess Liu Han when she first ascended to heaven. The other 3... I'm afraid I don't know my history that well, Bion said aloud. She then began to double back. At the same time, she reviewed her surroundings as well. 3 choices, only 1 correct. The princess, the fairy, or the god. I think I know which, Bion said. With sudden certainty, she thrust her arm down the length of one of the holes. No! Plato screamed under the weight of the warrior women. Bion ignored his lamentations as she reached into the rock's depths, her arm completely in, her eyes squeezed tight. She yelled in fury, then attempted to pull her arm free. Everyone watched in fear for the village girl they had all come to care about, their movement restricted by the weapons aimed in their directions. All they could do was to watch helplessly. Bian continued to yell as she pulled her hand free to reveal not a puncture wound, but a large black egg gripped tight in her fist. She held it for all to see, continuing to yell, now in triumph. The warrior women lowered their weapons and allowed Luther and the others to go and congratulate her. Luther was the first, sweeping her up into the air, her triumphant yell turning into a squeal. After a minute, Qian made the call to let Plato up as well, the earlier tension now gone. After the others had congratulated her, Plato moved forward and took her into his arms. "You silly, impulsive, crazy, brave girl," Plato mused. Then pulling her close, he kissed her. Deep, passionate, and unbridled. After a few seconds they parted, both now conscious of their surroundings and the looks from the others. Luther was the first to break the silence. "How did you know?" Luther asked. "I didn't. Not for sure. The sisters here held the clue," Bian said. "I'm not sure we follow," Nat said. "I asked myself what kind of divinity would inspire women such as these. Warrior women would follow a selfless, caring spirit, but also one who was willing to fight for a cause. Then Chien Tran, the god of war." Bian turned to Qian, who smiled back. "Well done," Qian replied. "Now that you've completed the tests, it is time to collect your bounty." They were led from the bowels of the temple and into a carefully guarded courtyard. Beautiful and serene, the courtyard was lush with gardens and tranquil with running fountains. Qian led them to a far wall where what looked like a one-sided set of ancient mechanical scales protruded from the wall. "Place your eggs on the scales pan," Qian instructed. One at a time, Plato, Luther, and finally Bian placed their eggs into the pan and waited for what was to happen next. The arm of the scale dipped down under the combined weight of the black eggs. There was a moment of pause, then the nearest fountain, a large cross-legged Buddha, stopped its supply of water, and the statue whence it sprang began to move. There was a sound of scraping granite as it moved slowly from its podium. Everyone, including Qian, watched in utter fascination. The movement was slow, taking a full minute, until it eventually stopped. From what they had surmised, the pillar on which the Buddha and podium had previously sat was hollow underneath. Everyone looked toward Plato. "You take the honors," Plato said to Bian. Bian slowly mounted the steps and walked hesitantly towards the hollow pillar. Cautiously, she peered into the dark, dusty confines and slowly reached within the hollow construction. They watched as Bian pulled from its depths the statue of the fourth and last dragon. That seals today's tale in shadows. We hope Plato Wyngard and the Valley of the Immortals has drawn you deeper into its enigma. Return soon to Crow's Quills books, where the next chapter awaits, whispering secrets yet untold.